Tom Lawson never imagined that the rusty, dented trailer he called home would hold a secret worth $210 million. When a violent desert storm tore away part of his roof that fateful night, revealing hidden compartments filled with decades-old oil rights documentation, the man everyone in Clearwater Ridge called Scrap Man was about to become the wealthiest person in 3 counties. But getting there would test every ounce of strength he had left. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across the aluminum siding of Tom's trailer as he stepped outside, his work boots crunching on the gravel that passed for a driveway. The metal structure sat like a beached whale on the 5 acres of scrubland he'd managed to scrape together enough money to rent after losing his house 6 months earlier. Every surface of the trailer bore the scars of its previous life. Dents from hailstorms, rust stains that looked like tears running down its sides, and a front door that required a specific combination of pulling, lifting, and cursing to open properly. Tom's reflection in the cracked side mirror of his pickup truck showed a man who had aged a decade in the past year. His brown hair, once thick and carefully maintained for his job at the insurance office, now hung limp and unwashed. Dark circles under his eyes spoke of too many sleepless nights spent worrying about his 8-year-old daughter Maya's future, and too many early mornings spent at whatever construction job he could find to keep food on their small fold-out table. The drive into Clearwater Ridge took 15 minutes along a dusty road that seemed to stretch endlessly through the desert landscape of eastern New Mexico. Sagebrush and tumbleweeds dominated the scenery, interrupted occasionally by rusted oil derricks that had stood abandoned since the boom days of the 1980s. Tom's truck wheezed and rattled with each bump, a sound that had become as familiar as his own breathing. Main Street in Clearwater Ridge consisted of 3 blocks of weathered storefronts, most of which had seen better days. The hardware store, Miller's Grocery, the post office, and Rosie's Diner formed the commercial heart of a town that had never quite recovered from the oil bust that had sent most of its young people fleeing to bigger cities. Tom pulled into the parking space in front of the diner, knowing that the breakfast crowd would provide the best audience for his daily humiliation. "Well, look what the desert wind blew in," called out Buck Harrison from his usual spot at the counter. Buck owned the largest ranch in the county and had made it clear from day one that he considered Tom's presence in the community to be a temporary inconvenience. "How's life in the scrap heap, Lawson?" Tom ordered his coffee black and tried to ignore the snickers from the other patrons. These were people he had once considered friends, back when he wore pressed shirts and carried a briefcase instead of wearing paint-stained jeans and carrying a thermos full of instant coffee. The transformation from respected insurance agent to trailer park resident had been swift and merciless, accelerated by the divorce that had cost him his house, his savings, and his standing in the community. "Heard you're working for Rodriguez Construction now," continued Buck, his voice carrying the particular tone reserved for discussing the failures of others. "That's got to be quite a step down from pushing papers in that fancy office." Tom's jaw tightened as he counted out exact change for his coffee. The construction work was backbreaking and poorly paid, but it was honest labor that kept food on the table and gas in his truck. More importantly, it meant Maya could stay in the same school district where she had friends and some semblance of stability in her life. "Work is work," Tom replied quietly, unwilling to give Buck the satisfaction of a reaction. "I suppose it is," Buck laughed, turning back to his breakfast companions. "Though I'm not sure how long that trailer's going to hold up in the wind out there. Might want to invest in some tie-downs before the next storm season." The comment stunned because Tom had been thinking the same thing. The trailer had been cheap for a reason, and every strong wind made him wonder if he'd wake up one morning to find his home scattered across the desert in pieces. But tie-downs cost money, and money was something Tom measured in dollars rather than hundreds these days. The bell above the diner door chimed as Tom left, and he could hear the conversation resume behind him with renewed enthusiasm. His name would be mentioned several more times before the breakfast crowd dispersed, each repetition adding another layer to the legend of his downfall. The story had taken on mythic proportions in the retelling, growing more dramatic with each version, until Tom barely recognized his own life in the narratives that circulated around town. The construction site where Tom spent his days was a new subdivision being built on the outskirts of town for the few families affluent enough to afford modern homes. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was helping to build houses he could never afford while living in accommodations that most people wouldn't use to store garden tools. His supervisor, Carlos Rodriguez, was a decent man who paid fair wages and didn't ask too many questions about his workers' personal lives. But even Carlos couldn't hide his surprise when Tom had first given his address as the aluminum trailer on Townie Road 12. "You know, Tom," Carlos had said during their first week working together, "there are some apartments in town that might not cost much more than what you're paying for that land rental." Tom had explained about Maya and the school district, about wanting to give her some space to run around rather than trapping her in a cramped apartment complex, but he hadn't mentioned the real reason. The trailer, as pathetic as it looked, represented independence in a way that renting from another landlord never could. When everything else had been taken from him, the ability to close his own door, even if it was a door that required mechanical persuasion to function properly, felt like the last shred of dignity he had left. The workdays blurred together in a haze of concrete dust and aching muscles. Tom mixed cement, carried supplies, and learned skills he never thought he'd need when he was sitting behind a desk calculating insurance premiums and risk assessments. His hands, once soft from office work, developed calluses and permanent stains from the construction materials. His back ached constantly from lifting and bending, and his knees protested every morning when he climbed down from the trailer's narrow steps. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional weight of picking Maya up from school each afternoon. She was at an age where she was beginning to notice the differences between her life and the lives of her classmates. Her school clothes were purchased from thrift stores and consignment shops, her backpack was a hand-me-down from a cousin, and her lunch money came from whatever Tom could spare after paying for gas and utilities. "Daddy, can we get pizza tonight?" Maya asked as they drove home one Thursday afternoon, her small face turned hopefully toward him. Tom's wallet contained exactly $23, which had to last until Friday's payday. Gas for the truck would cost $15, leaving $8 for groceries that had to stretch until the weekend. "How about we make spaghetti instead?" he suggested, forcing cheerfulness into his voice. "We've got those noodles and that jar of sauce from the store." Maya nodded with the resigned acceptance of a child who had learned not to ask for too much. The expression on her face broke Tom's heart in ways that all of Buck Harrison's comments never could. She deserved better than instant noodles and canned sauce, better than a father who had to choose between new school shoes and paying the electric bill. The trailer felt smaller every day, its thin walls offering little protection from either the desert heat or the judgment of neighbors who lived in actual houses. The kitchenette consisted of a 2-burner stove, a mini refrigerator, and barely enough counter space to prepare a sandwich. The bathroom was so narrow that Tom had to squeeze sideways to reach the shower, and the bedroom area was separated from the living space by nothing more than a curtain Maya had helped him hang from hooks screwed into the ceiling. But Maya had adapted with the resilience of childhood, turning the cramped space into an adventure. She had claimed the dine-in area as her homework station, and had decorated the walls around it with pictures she'd drawn of their house. In her artwork, the trailer looked like a cottage, complete with flowers growing around the foundation and a picket fence that existed only in her imagination. "I like our house, Daddy," she told him one evening as they shared a dinner of hamburger helper and canned green beans. "It's cozy." Tom smiled and ruffled her hair, wondering how he had been blessed with a daughter wise enough to find joy in their circumstances. Maya's optimism was a daily reminder that his situation wasn't permanent, that with enough hard work and determination, he could build something better for both of them. The trailer's flaws became more apparent as autumn gave way to winter. The heating system consisted of a single propane unit that struggled to warm the entire space, leaving the far ends perpetually cold. Tom had purchased thick blankets and had taught Maya to layer her clothing, turning their evening routine into a game of staying cozy rather than admitting they couldn't afford to heat the place properly. The roof leaked in 3 places, requiring the strategic placement of pots and buckets during rainstorms. Tom had climbed up with a tube of roofing cement and had done his best to patch the holes, But his amateur repair work was no match for the desert's extreme weather conditions. Each storm brought new challenges, new leaks to patch, new reminders of just how precarious their shelter really was. Winter in eastern New Mexico brought fierce winds that howled across the open landscape, with nothing to slow them down. The trailer rocked and creaked in the gusts, its tie-down straps straining against anchors that Tom hoped were driven deep enough into the sandy soil. On the worst nights, he lay awake listening to the metal walls flex and groan, wondering if this would be the storm that finally scattered their home across the desert. Maya seemed oblivious to the structural concerns, sleeping soundly through even the loudest windstorms. Her trust in his ability to keep them safe was both touching and terrifying. Tom had never felt the weight of responsibility more keenly than during those long nights when the trailer shook like a ship in a storm. December brought an unexpected gift in the form of a small Christmas bonus from Carlos Rodriguez. The extra $100 wasn't enough to transform their circumstances, but it was sufficient to buy Maya a few presents and to splurge on a real Christmas dinner with turkey and all the traditional sides. Tom wrapped the gifts in newspaper comics and placed them under a small artificial tree he'd purchased at a post-holiday clearance sale the previous year. "This is the best Christmas ever, Daddy," Maya announced on Christmas morning as she played with her new coloring books and crayons. "I love our little house." Tom watched her color pictures of grand mansions and fairy tale castles, wondering if she really preferred their trailer, or if she was simply trying to make him feel better about their situation. Either way, her contentment filled him with a mixture of love and determination. She deserved stability and security, and he was going to find a way to provide both. The new year brought hope in the form of rumors about a large construction project that would need experienced workers. Tom had proven himself reliable and skilled during his months with Rodriguez Construction, earning raises and additional responsibilities. Carlos had even hinted that there might be opportunities for advancement, possibly moving into a supervisory role that would come with better pay and benefits. But hope was a dangerous thing for a man in Tom's position. Every time he allowed himself to believe that their circumstances were improving, something happened to remind him how precarious their situation really was. The truck needed new tires, Maya needed dental work, the trailer's hot water heater stopped working, and each expense ate away at any progress he had made towards saving money for a better place to live. February brought the worst storm of the season, a massive weather system that swept across the desert with winds gusting up to 70 miles per hour. Tom had driven home from work early, concerned about leaving Maya alone in the trailer during such severe weather. The sky had taken on an ominous green tinge that locals recognized as a sign of serious trouble. "Is it going to be okay, Daddy?" Maya asked as the trailer began to rock more violently than usual. Tom gathered her into his arms and moved them both to the center of the space, as far as possible from the walls that were flexing visibly with each gust. "We're going to be fine, sweetheart. This old trailer has been through worse storms than this." He hoped his voice sounded more confident than he felt. The wind was unlike anything he had experienced since moving to the desert, a constant roaring that made conversation difficult and sleep impossible. Objects outside were being lifted and thrown, creating a percussion of impacts against the trailer's sides. Tom could hear metal groaning and scraping, the sound of their home being pushed to its structural limits. Around midnight, the sound changed from groaning to a sharp crack that seemed to come from directly overhead. Tom looked up to see a section of the ceiling beginning to sag, the cheap paneling separating from its mounting points under the stress of the wind. He grabbed Maya and their emergency supplies and huddled in the bathroom, the most structurally sound part of the trailer. The sounds from outside were apocalyptic, a combination of howling wind, flying debris, and the metallic protests of their shelter. Tom held Maya close, singing softly in her ear to mask the frightening noises, while mentally preparing for the possibility that they might need to abandon the trailer entirely. He had identified the construction site office as the nearest solid building, but reaching it would mean exposing them both to the full fury of the storm. The crack came at 2:30 in the morning, a sound like a gunshot that was followed immediately by the roar of wind through a new opening in the roof. Tom felt Maya's small body tense in his arms as cold air and debris began to swirl through the interior of the trailer. "Stay here, baby," he instructed, settling her in the bathtub where she would have some protection from flying objects. Daddy needs to see how bad it is. The damage was worse than he had feared. A section of roof approximately 3 feet square had been completely torn away, leaving a ragged opening that exposed the interior to the full force of the storm. Rain and debris were pouring through the hole, already soaking the dinette area where Maya did her homework every evening. But something else had been exposed by the damage, something that didn't belong in the ceiling of a cheap trailer. Tom climbed onto a chair to get a better look, using his flashlight to illuminate the exposed areas around the damage. What he saw made no sense. Built into the space between the outer roof and the inner ceiling was a compartment that had been carefully constructed and sealed. The compartment contained what appeared to be rolled documents wrapped in multiple layers of plastic, protected from moisture and time by someone who had understood the importance of preservation. The storm was still raging, making it impossible to investigate further without risking serious injury. Tom secured a tarp over the opening as best he could and spent the rest of the night in the bathroom with Maya, both of them listening to the wind gradually diminish as the weather system moved east toward Texas. Dawn revealed a landscape transformed by the storm's fury. Sagebrush had been uprooted and scattered. A neighbor's storage shed had been relocated half a mile from its original position, and power lines hung loose from tilted poles. But the trailer had survived, albeit with significant damage to the roof and water damage throughout the interior. Maya surveyed the destruction with the wide eyes of a child seeing the aftermath of nature's violence for the first time. "Is our house broken, Daddy?" "It's hurt," Tom replied, choosing his words carefully. "But we can fix it." The repair costs would be substantial, probably more than the trailer was worth. Tom's insurance policy had a deductible higher than his savings account, and he doubted whether the coverage would be sufficient to restore their home to its previous condition. But before he could worry about repairs, he needed to investigate the mysterious compartment that the storm had revealed. With Maya safely at school, Tom returned to examine the hidden space more carefully. The compartment had been professionally constructed, built into the trailer during its original manufacturing rather than added later. Someone had gone to considerable expense and effort to create a secure hiding place, and whatever they had hidden there had been important enough to warrant such elaborate protection. The plastic-wrapped documents were secured with multiple layers of tape that had maintained its seal despite decades of temperature fluctuations and humidity changes. Tom carefully cut through the wrapping, his hands trembling slightly with anticipation. What he found inside changed everything he thought he knew about his pathetic little home. The documents were oil and mineral rights certificates, dozens of them, covering thousands of acres throughout the county. The names on the certificates meant nothing to Tom, but the legal descriptions included his rental property and extended far beyond it. According to the dates on the paperwork, the rights had been purchased in the 1970s, during the last major oil boom, when land in the area could be acquired cheaply and speculation was running high. But these were just speculative purchases. Mixed in with the rights certificates were geological surveys, soil samples, and correspondence with oil companies that painted a picture of serious exploration and development plans. Someone had invested significant money and time in researching the oil potential of the region, and they had been confident enough in their findings to purchase mineral rights covering nearly 10,000 acres. The final documents in the collection were the most intriguing. Legal papers establishing a trust fund, with detailed instructions for the management and eventual distribution of any revenues generated by the mineral rights. The trust had been designed to remain inactive until triggered by specific conditions, including the death of the original trustee or the passage of 30 years from the date of establishment. Tom calculated the dates and realized that the 30-year threshold had been passed 5 years earlier. According to the legal documents, the trust should have been activated and its assets distributed according to the terms established by its creator. But the trust required notification from the trustee or the discovery of the original documents to begin the distribution process. The name on the trust documents was Marcus Wheeler, and the address listed was the same property where Tom was now living. Wheeler had apparently been the original owner of the land and the trailer, and he had used the mobile home as both a residence and a secure storage location for his most important papers. The trust named Wheeler's heirs as the primary beneficiaries, but included provisions for the current legal resident of the property if no valid heirs could be located. Tom spent the next several hours reading through every document, trying to understand the full implications of his discovery. The mineral rights covered areas that had been extensively developed in recent years, with new drilling techniques making previously uneconomical deposits profitable. If the geological surveys were accurate, and if oil companies were still interested in the region, the rights could be worth substantial money. But determining the current value would require professional expertise. Tom needed lawyers, geologists, and oil industry experts to evaluate the collection and establish its legitimate worth. The problem was that such expertise cost money that Tom didn't have, and he couldn't risk revealing his discovery to anyone who might try to take advantage of his desperate circumstances. The first step was researching Marcus Wheeler and trying to determine whether he had any living heirs. Tom spent his evenings at the public library, using their internet access to search genealogy websites and public records. What he discovered was a man who had lived alone, never married, and had no children. Wheeler had worked in the oil industry during the boom years, had made shrewd investments in mineral rights, and had died intestate 15 years earlier. The trail of Wheeler's estate led through probate court records that showed his property had been sold for taxes after his death. The trailer and land had changed hands several times before Tom had rented it, but none of the subsequent owners had known about the hidden compartment or its contents. According to the trust documents, the failure to locate Wheeler's heirs and the passage of time had activated the residual beneficiary clause, making Tom the legal recipient of whatever value the mineral rights retained. But legal ownership and practical access to that value were two different things entirely. Tom needed professional representation to navigate the complex process of activating the trust and determining the current status of the mineral rights. Every lawyer he contacted wanted a substantial retainer just to review the documents, money that Tom couldn't spare without risking their ability to buy food and pay rent. The solution came from an unexpected source. Carlos Rodriguez had a brother-in-law who worked as a paralegal for an oil and gas law firm in Albuquerque. When Tom finally worked up the courage to explain his situation, Carlos offered to arrange an initial consultation at no charge, calling in a family favor to get expert advice. The meeting took place on a Saturday morning in the law office's conference room, with Tom wearing his best clothes and carrying the precious documents in a borrowed briefcase. Attorney Janet Morrison specialized in oil and gas law and had been practicing in New Mexico for over 20 years. Her preliminary review of Tom's documents took nearly 2 hours, during which her expression grew increasingly serious. "Mr. Lawson," she finally said, looking up from the papers spread across the conference table, "if these documents are legitimate, and if the mineral rights they represent are still valid, you may be sitting on a very valuable discovery." She explained that the mineral rights covered areas that had recently been identified as part of a major shale oil formation. New extraction techniques had made the deposits economically viable, and several oil companies were actively pursuing drilling rights in the region. A preliminary assessment suggested that the rights Tom had discovered could be worth anywhere from $50 million to $200 million, depending on the actual oil reserves and the terms of any extraction agreements. The news was so overwhelming that Tom had difficulty processing it. The numbers Attorney Morrison was discussing seemed fictional, disconnected from any reality he could imagine. $200 million was more money than existed in his world, an amount so large that he couldn't conceive of what it would mean for his and Maya's life. "There are several steps we'll need to take," Morrison continued, her voice bringing him back to the present. "First, we need to verify the current status of these mineral rights and ensure they haven't been invalidated by subsequent legal actions. Then we need to have the geological surveys updated and confirmed by current standards. Finally, we need to approach the oil companies operating in the region to determine their interest in purchasing or leasing the rights." End quote. She offered to handle the case on a contingency basis, taking her fee from any eventual settlement, rather than requiring payment up front. The arrangement would allow Tom to pursue his claim without risking his limited financial resources, but it would also mean waiting months, or possibly years, for any resolution. Tom signed the representation agreement with hands that trembled from excitement and fear. The possibility of wealth beyond his imagination was intoxicating, but he had learned not to trust hope too completely. Too many things could go wrong. Too many obstacles could derail the process before he saw any actual benefit. The verification process began immediately, with Morrison's firm conducting title searches and reviewing decades of property records. The mineral rights were confirmed as valid and unencumbered, with no subsequent sales or transfers that would have invalidated Tom's claim. The geological surveys were sent to contemporary experts for evaluation and updating, with preliminary results confirming the presence of substantial oil reserves. While the legal and technical evaluations proceeded, Tom continued his construction work and tried to maintain normal routines for Maya's sake. He repaired the trailer roof, with help from Carlos and several co-workers, but left the hidden compartment intact as evidence of his discovery. The damaged area was covered with a patch that concealed the opening while allowing access if needed for future legal proceedings. The hardest part was keeping the secret from Maya and from the community that had watched his downfall with such interest. Tom couldn't risk word spreading before the legal process was complete, knowing that premature publicity could complicate his claim or attract unwanted attention from people who might try to challenge his rights to the discovery. But maintaining secrecy, while his entire world was potentially changing, required constant vigilance. Tom found himself rehearsing normal conversations, practicing responses to routine questions that wouldn't reveal his growing excitement and anxiety. He continued to shop for groceries with the same careful attention to prices, continued to wear work clothes that showed the stains and wear of manual labor, continued to drive the same rattling pickup truck that barely passed its annual inspection. The breakthrough came 4 months after his initial meeting with attorney Morrison. The updated geological surveys confirmed the presence of oil reserves that exceeded even the optimistic projections from the 1970s. Modern extraction techniques would allow access to deposits that had been impossible to reach with older technology, multiplying the potential value of the mineral rights substantially. 3 major oil companies submitted bids for the rights, with the highest offer reaching $210 million for a complete purchase of all mineral rights covered by Wheeler's original trust. Alternative proposals included long-term leasing arrangements that could potentially generate even more revenue over time, but with greater uncertainty and complexity. Tom sat in attorney Morrison's office, staring at documents that represented more money than he had ever imagined existing in one place. The highest bid would pay him enough to buy not just a house, but an entire neighborhood. Maya could attend any college she chose, they could travel anywhere in the world, they could give away millions of dollars to charity, and still live more comfortably than 99% of the population. "What do you recommend?" Tom asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Morrison smiled, understanding the magnitude of the decision he was facing. "The outright purchase offers immediate security and eliminates all risk. The leasing arrangements could potentially generate more total revenue, but they depend on oil prices, extraction costs, and production levels that we can't predict. For someone in your circumstances, I would generally recommend taking the certainty of immediate payment." Tom nodded, though the rational part of his mind was still struggling to accept the reality of the situation. 6 months earlier, he had been counting dollars and wondering how to afford Maya's school supplies. Now he was choosing between different ways to become one of the wealthiest people in the state. The closing took place 3 weeks later, with representatives from the oil company, several attorneys, and various technical experts gathering in a conference room that felt larger than Tom's entire trailer. The paperwork took hours to complete, with each document requiring careful review and signature. Tom's hand was cramping by the time he signed the final transfer, officially conveying mineral rights worth $210 million. The money was transferred electronically to accounts that Morrison had helped establish, with immediate access to funds that would cover Tom and Maya's needs for several lifetimes. Tom walked out of the building with a cashier's check for $1 million as an immediate advance, more money than he had earned in the previous 5 years combined. The drive back to Clearwater Ridge felt surreal, like traveling between 2 completely different worlds. Tom stopped at Miller's Grocery, the same store where he had carefully counted coins to buy Maya's school lunch supplies, and purchased armloads of groceries without checking prices or calculating totals. The clerk, who had watched him use coupons and count change for months, stared in confusion as Tom paid with crisp $100 bills and left a $50 tip. Maya was waiting at the trailer when Tom arrived, having been picked up from school by a neighbor as usual. She helped carry groceries inside, her eyes widening at the quantity and variety of food Tom had purchased. "Did we win the lottery, Daddy?" she asked, examining a package of expensive cookies that had never appeared in their shopping cart before. Tom sat down beside her at the dinette table, where she had done homework by flashlight during power outages and had eaten countless meals of instant noodles and canned soup. "Something like that, sweetheart. We found something very valuable that had been hidden in our house for a long time." He explained the discovery in terms that an 8-year-old could understand, describing the hidden papers and the oil rights without overwhelming her with the magnitude of their changed circumstances. Maya listened with the serious expression she wore when processing important information. "Does this mean we can get a bigger house?" she asked. "We can get any house you want," Tom replied, his voice thick with emotion. "We can get a house with a big yard and your own bedroom and a kitchen where we can cook real meals." Maya considered this for a moment, then looked around the trailer that had been their home during the most difficult period of their lives. "Can we keep this house too? I like it here." Tom laughed, the sound carrying months of accumulated tension and fear. "We can keep it if you want, but we don't have to live in it anymore." That evening, Tom called his ex-wife to share the news. Linda had remarried and was living in Denver with her new husband and their infant son. She had maintained minimal contact with Maya and had made it clear that Tom's financial struggles were an embarrassment she preferred not to acknowledge. $200 million? Linda repeated, her voice betraying disbelief and something that might have been regret. "From that awful trailer you're living in?" Tom confirmed the amount and explained the circumstances of the discovery. Linda's tone changed dramatically as the reality of the situation became clear. She began asking about visitation schedules and custody arrangements, suddenly interested in playing a more active role in Maya's life. "I think Maya is very happy with her current arrangement," Tom replied diplomatically. "But of course she can visit whenever she wants to." The conversation continued for over an hour, with Linda probing for details about Tom's financial situation and future plans. By the end, she was suggesting that Maya might be better served by moving to Denver, where she could attend better schools and have access to cultural opportunities. Tom listened politely, but made no commitments beyond maintaining their existing custody agreement. The next morning brought the first test of Tom's resolve to handle his changed circumstances responsibly. Buck Harrison appeared at the trailer's front door, his usual swagger replaced by an ingratiating smile that fooled no one. "Tom, my friend," Buck began, his voice carrying a warmth that had never been present before. "I heard some interesting rumors in town yesterday. Something about oil rights and a big discovery." Word had spread despite Tom's efforts to maintain secrecy. In a town the size of Clearwater Ridge, significant financial transactions couldn't remain hidden for long. Too many people had been involved in the verification and closing process, and too many of them had connections to the local community. "I've been fortunate," Ta replied carefully, not inviting Buck inside but not closing the door entirely. Buck's smile broadened. "Fortunate is right. Listen, I've been thinking about our conversation at the diner a few months back. I might have been a little harsh in my assessment of your situation. You know how it is. Sometimes we say things we don't cross." "Really mean." Tom remembered the conversation perfectly. Buck had suggested that Tom was a failure as a father and a man, that Maya would be better off living with relatives who could provide stability. The words had cut deeply at the time, reinforcing Tom's own fears about his ability to care for his daughter. "I appreciate you stopping by," Tom said, his tone neutral but firm. "Maya and I are doing fine." Buck lingered on the doorstep, clearly hoping for an invitation inside, or at least a more detailed conversation about Tom's windfall. When neither was forthcoming, he finally retreated to his truck, calling out a promise to catch up soon. That sounded more like a threat than a friendly gesture. The parade of visitors continued throughout the day. People who had barely acknowledged Tom's existence during his months of struggle suddenly appeared with offers of friendship, investment opportunities, and requests for loans. Former colleagues from the insurance office called to congratulate him and suggest lunch meetings to discuss mutually beneficial arrangements. Even Maya's teacher sent home a note mentioning a new fundraising campaign for school improvements. Tom realized that his anonymity was gone forever. The man who had been invisible during his poverty had become intensely visible in his wealth. Every decision he made would be scrutinized, every purchase analyzed, every relationship evaluated for its financial implications. The first major purchase was a house in the established neighborhood where Maya's classmates lived. Tom chose a modest four-bedroom home with a large backyard, deliberately avoiding the mansion-sized properties that his resources could easily accommodate. He wanted Maya to have space and comfort without creating too dramatic a change in their lifestyle. Moving day required careful coordination to transfer their few possessions from the trailer to rooms that were larger than their entire previous living space. Maya ran through the house with unbridled joy, claiming the bedroom with windows overlooking the backyard, and immediately beginning to plan how she would decorate it. "This is really our house, Daddy?" she asked for the third time, still unable to fully believe the transformation in their circumstances. "This is our house," Tom confirmed, watching her explore rooms that would give her the privacy and space every child deserved. But Tom insisted on keeping the trailer as well, maintaining it as a reminder of where they had come from and what they had survived together. The aluminum structure, that had once been a source of shame, was now a monument to perseverance and the unexpected ways that life could change. The hidden compartment was carefully preserved, though it no longer contained the documents that had changed their destiny. Tom commissioned a small plaque that marked the location where their fortune had been discovered, a permanent reminder of the storm that had torn their roof and revealed their future. Financial advisors helped Tom establish trusts and investment accounts that would preserve and grow their wealth for future generations. The majority of the money was placed in conservative investments that would generate steady income while protecting the principal from market volatility. But Tom also set aside substantial amounts for immediate needs, including Maya's education, charitable giving, and the simple pleasure of never again having to choose between necessities and wants. The first major charitable donation went to the Clearwater Ridge School District, funding new computers, updated textbooks, and scholarship programs for students who might otherwise lack opportunities for higher education. Tom insisted that the donation be made anonymously, though everyone in town knew the source of the district's sudden good fortune. Maya adapted to their changed circumstances with the resilience that had carried her through their months of poverty. She appreciated her new bedroom and the security of knowing there would always be food in the refrigerator, but she hadn't forgotten the lessons learned during their time in the trailer. She continued to turn off lights when leaving rooms, to finish everything on her plate at meals, and to treat new possessions with the care of someone who understood their value. "Are we rich now, Daddy?" she asked one evening as Tom tucked her into bed in a room larger than their entire previous home. "We're comfortable, sweetheart," Tom replied, choosing his words carefully. "We have enough money that we don't have to worry anymore." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad we don't have to worry. But I kind of liked our little house too. It felt cozy." Tom smiled, understanding exactly what she meant. The trailer had been their sanctuary during the most difficult period of their lives, the place where they had learned to depend on each other and to find happiness in simple things. Wealth could provide security and opportunities, but it couldn't replicate the intimacy of shared struggle or the satisfaction of surviving hardship together. The story of Tom's discovery spread far beyond Clearwater Ridge, attracting attention from newspapers, television stations, and documentary filmmakers. The narrative of the struggling single father who had found fortune hidden in his dilapidated trailer captured public imagination, becoming a modern fairy tale of perseverance rewarded by unexpected luck. Tom granted a few carefully selected interviews, but generally avoided publicity, preferring to focus on building a stable life for Maya rather than becoming a celebrity. He established a foundation to help other single parents facing financial hardships, providing emergency assistance and educational opportunities that might prevent others from experiencing the desperation he had known. The trailer remained on its original site, maintained as both a reminder of their journey and a symbol of hope for others facing similar struggles. Tom hired a caretaker to keep it clean and in good repair, transforming the once deteriorating structure into a monument to the power of perseverance. Years passed, and Maya grew into a confident teenager who understood both the value of money and the importance of character. She excelled in school, participated in community service projects, and never forgot the lessons learned during their time of struggle. When college applications came due, She chose to attend the state university rather than the Ivy League schools that actively recruited her, explaining that she wanted to stay close to home and to the community that had shaped her values. Tom found purpose in his wealth that extended far beyond personal comfort. The foundation he established grew into a significant force for change in rural communities throughout New Mexico and beyond. Single parents facing eviction received emergency housing assistance. Children from low-income families received scholarships for college. And small towns struggling with economic decline received grants for infrastructure improvements and job training programs. But perhaps the most meaningful impact of Tom's discovery was the change it brought to Clearwater Ridge itself. The town that had once whispered about his failures now took pride in his success, using his story as inspiration for their own renewal efforts. New businesses opened on Main Street, young families moved back to raise their children in the community their grandparents had called home, and the abandoned oil derricks that dotted the landscape were finally removed and replaced with wind turbines that generated clean energy and steady income. Buck Harrison, who had once ridiculed Tom's circumstances with such enthusiasm, became one of the foundation's most vocal supporters after his own ranch was saved from foreclosure by an emergency loan program Tom had quietly funded. The transformation in Buck's attitude was complete, though Tom never mentioned their previous interactions or made him feel uncomfortable about his earlier behavior. Some lessons, Tom had learned, were best left to teach themselves. The diner where Tom had endured daily humiliation became a meeting place for Foundation board members and community leaders working on renewal projects. Rosie, the longtime owner, often pointed to the corner booth where Tom used to sit alone with his coffee, telling visitors about the morning when everyone in town learned that the man they had dismissed as Scrap Man had become one of the wealthiest people in the state. Tom's construction skills, learned during those difficult months when physical labor was his only source of income, proved valuable in his philanthropic work. He personally supervised the building of low-income housing projects, ensuring that families facing the same struggles he had experienced would have decent, affordable places to live. Each project incorporated hidden compartments, not for storing valuable documents, but for families to keep their most treasured possessions safe during moves or emergencies. The original trailer served as headquarters for the Foundation's Rural Housing Initiative, its humble appearance a deliberate reminder that meaningful change often begins in the most unlikely places. Visitors expecting to meet in a corporate boardroom were instead welcomed into the aluminum structure that had once been a source of shame but had become a symbol of hope transformed. Maya's 8th grade graduation took place in the school auditorium that Tom's donations had helped to renovate. As she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, Tom thought about all the nights they had spent doing homework by lamplight at the trailer's tiny dinette table, never imagining that their circumstances could change grass so dramatically. The journey from that cramped space to this moment of celebration seemed impossible, yet every step had been real and hard-earned. The mystery of Marcus Wheeler was finally solved when a distant cousin appeared, drawn by news coverage of the discovery. Wheeler had indeed died alone, but he had spoken often to his cousin about his belief that the mineral rights he had purchased would someday make someone wealthy. He had hidden the documents in the trailer because he trusted that whoever was living there when the oil boom returned would need the money more than some distant corporation or government entity. Wheeler's cousin declined any claim to the mineral rights, explaining that Marcus had always intended for his investment to benefit whoever discovered it. The old man had believed that wealth should reward perseverance rather than inheritance, and that the person living modestly on his land would be more deserving of fortune than relatives who had never shared his struggles. This revelation added another layer of meaning to Tom's discovery. The money had not been hidden by chance or accident, but by a man who had deliberately chosen to help whoever might need it most. Wheeler's generosity, preserved for decades in the hidden compartment, had connected two strangers across time in a partnership neither had known existed. Tom established a scholarship in Marcus Wheeler's name, funding education for students from rural communities who showed promise but lacked resources. The scholarship requirements emphasized character and determination over test scores, seeking to identify young people who possessed the same qualities that had allowed both Wheeler and Tom to overcome difficult circumstances. The annual scholarship ceremony took place at the trailer, with recipients gathering in the small space where their benefactor's fortune had been discovered. Each student heard the story of the storm that had changed everything, the hidden documents that had transformed poverty into wealth, and the responsibility that came with unexpected opportunities. As Maya prepared for high school, she asked Tom about their plans for the future. They were sitting on the steps of the trailer, watching a desert sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The view had not changed since their first night in the aluminum shelter. But everything else about their world was different. "What do you want to do, sweetheart?" Tom asked, genuinely curious about her perspective on their transformed circumstances. Maya was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer with the thoughtfulness that had become her trademark. "I want to help other kids who are going through what we went through. I want them to know that things can get better, even when everything seems hopeless." Tom smiled, recognizing in her response the same values that had guided his own use of their fortune. Maya had learned from their experience that wealth was not an end in itself, but a tool that could be used to create positive change in other people's lives. The foundation grew under Maya's influence, expanding its focus to include programs specifically designed by and for young people who had experienced poverty. Teen advisory boards helped design scholarship criteria, peer mentorship programs connected current recipients with successful alumni, and youth leadership initiatives trained the next generation of community organizers, and social entrepreneurs. Tom often reflected on the chain of events that had brought them from desperation to prosperity. If he had not lost his job, he would never have moved to the trailer. If the divorce settlement had been different, he might have found other accommodation. If the storm had been less severe, or had struck from a different direction, the roof damage might not have occurred in the location that revealed the hidden compartment. Each element of their crisis had been necessary to create the circumstances that led to their discovery. The very experiences that had seemed like failures at the time had positioned them to receive Wheeler's long-delayed gift. Tom's suffering had not been meaningless, but it served a purpose he could never have anticipated. The town of Clearwater Ridge prospered along with the foundation, becoming a model for rural community development that attracted visitors from across the country. The success story that began with a struggling father in a damaged trailer had grown into a comprehensive approach to addressing poverty and creating opportunities in forgotten communities. Maya's high school graduation was held in a new auditorium, funded by the foundation, with Tom watching from the same seat he had occupied 4 years earlier, when the facility was just an architect's drawing. She had been accepted to multiple universities with full scholarships, but had also received offers from the foundation's college partners, who wanted to work with her on expanding youth programs. During her valedictorian speech, Maya spoke about the importance of perspective in defining success. "4 years ago," she said, looking directly at Tom, "my father and I lived in a trailer that everyone thought was a symbol of failure. But that trailer taught us lessons about resilience, gratitude, and the power of hope that no mansion could have provided. Sometimes what looks like an ending is actually a beginning." The audience rose in sustained applause, understanding that they were witnessing the conclusion of a story that had captured their community's imagination and transformed their perception of what was possible. The girl who had once helped her father place buckets to catch rainwater was now preparing to study at university, armed with wisdom earned through hardship and resources to make a difference in the world. Tom's eyes filled with tears as he watched Maya accept her diploma, remembering the 8-year-old who had called their cramped trailer cozy and had found joy despite their difficult circumstances. She had grown into exactly the kind of person he had hoped to raise, combining intelligence with compassion, ambition with humility, and success with service to others. After the ceremony, as families gathered for photographs and celebrations, Tom and Maya walked together to the trailer for a private moment of reflection. The aluminum structure looked exactly as it had on the day they first moved in, except for the small plaque marking the location where their lives had changed forever. "Do you ever miss it, Daddy?" Maya asked, running her hand along the metal siding that had sheltered them during the most challenging period of their lives. "I miss the simplicity sometimes," Tom admitted. "There was something pure about those days when our biggest concerns were staying warm and having enough to eat. But I don't miss the fear, the uncertainty about whether we could make it through another month." Maya nodded, understanding the complex emotions that their journey had created. "I'm glad we went through it, though. It made us who we are." Tom hugged his daughter, marveling at the wisdom she had gained from experiences that many children never face. Their time in the trailer had been difficult, but it had also been formative in ways that privilege and comfort could never replicate. They had learned to depend on each other, to find strength in adversity, and to never take security for granted. As the sun set over the desert landscape that had been the backdrop for their transformation, Tom reflected on the lessons their story offered. Fortune could appear in the most unlikely places, hidden in the walls of structures that seemed worthless to outside observers. Perseverance could be rewarded in ways that exceeded the wildest dreams of those who practiced it. And sometimes the greatest gifts came disguised as the greatest challenges. The trailer stood as a testament to these truths, its humble appearance concealing the magnitude of the change it had made possible. Visitors often expressed surprise at its modest size and utilitarian design, expecting something more dramatic from the structure that had yielded such enormous wealth. But Tom had learned that the most important discoveries were often made in the most ordinary places by people who refused to give up hope. Years later, when Maya had graduated from college and was running her own nonprofit organization, she would bring her children to visit the trailer where their grandfather had found the strength to continue when everything Crawford seemed lost. They would hear the story of the storm that tore the roof away, the hidden compartments that revealed their family's fortune, and the man named Marcus Wheeler who had believed that perseverance should be rewarded. And in that small aluminum structure on 5 acres of desert scrubland, they would learn the most important lesson their family had to offer, that what others see as failure might actually be the foundation for success beyond imagination. The trailer that had once been a source of shame had become their family's most treasured possession, worth far more than the millions of dollars it had helped them discover. Tom Lawson had entered that trailer as a broken man with nothing left to lose. He had emerged as one of the wealthiest individuals in the state, but more importantly, as a father who had shown his daughter that no circumstances are permanent and no dreams are impossible. The transformation had begun with a storm that seemed like another disaster, but had ended with the discovery that sometimes the things we most want to hide from the world contain exactly what we need to change it. The town that had once laughed at the struggling dad living in the rusted trailer now pointed to it with pride, showing visitors the humble beginning of a story that had inspired an entire community to believe in the possibility of redemption and renewal. And in the end, that may have been Marcus Wheeler's greatest gift of all, the proof that one person's generosity could echo across decades to transform not just individual lives, but an entire town's understanding of what it meant to never give up hope. But the story was far from over. As Maya entered her junior year of college, studying social work and nonprofit management, she began developing ideas that would extend their family's impact far beyond the borders of Clearwater Ridge. Her thesis project focused on creating a national network of rural support centers, each one anchored by a symbolic structure that reminded communities of their capacity for transformation. The concept was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of building expensive new facilities, the program would identify existing structures in rural communities that had fallen into disrepair or disuse. These buildings, much like Tom's trailer, would be renovated and converted into community resource centers offering job training, financial counseling, educational support, and emergency assistance. Each center would tell the story of its own transformation, demonstrating that renewal was possible for both buildings and the people who used them. Maya's pilot project began in a neighboring county, where an abandoned gas station had sat empty for 15 years after the interstate highway bypass had diverted traffic away from the town. The building was structurally sound, but had become an eyesore, its broken windows and peeling paint a daily reminder of the community's economic decline. Maya saw potential where others saw only decay. Working with local contractors and volunteers, many of them trained through Tom's construction education programs, Maya supervised the gas station's conversion into the Wheeler Community Resource Center. The renovation preserved the building's original character while adding modern amenities including computer workstations, meeting rooms, a small library, and a commercial kitchen for job training programs. The grand opening drew visitors from across the region, including state officials and representatives from major foundations who had heard about the innovative approach to rural development. Maya, now 21 and poised beyond her years, gave tours that emphasized the parallels between building renovation and personal transformation. 6 months ago, everyone who drove past this building saw failure, she explained to one group of visitors. Today, you see possibility. That same shift in perspective can happen for individuals, families, and entire communities. Sometimes we just need someone to believe in our potential and give us the tools to rebuild. The success of the pilot project attracted national attention, with Maya being invited to speak at conferences and symposiums about rural development and community empowerment. Her presentations always included the story of the trailer discovery, using her family's experience as evidence that extraordinary opportunities could emerge from the most ordinary circumstances. Tom watched his daughter's growing influence with a mixture of pride and amazement. The 8-year-old who had cheerfully called their cramped trailer cozy was now addressing senators and foundation presidents about poverty alleviation strategies. She had inherited not just his determination, but also his ability to find hope in hopeless situations and to inspire others to see beyond their current circumstances. The Wheeler Community Resource Centers began appearing in towns across New Mexico, Colorado, and Texas. Each location was unique, adapted to local needs, and housed in buildings that carried their own stories of decline and renewal. A former movie theater became a center for arts education and creative therapy. An abandoned school was transformed into a hub for adult education and professional development. A defunct factory became a business incubator for entrepreneurs from low-income backgrounds. Maya's approach attracted funding from sources that traditional charity organizations struggled to access. Corporate sponsors were drawn to the visual impact of dramatic building transformations, while individual donors connected emotionally with stories of communities refusing to surrender to economic decline. The program's emphasis on self-sufficiency and empowerment appealed to political leaders across the spectrum, creating bipartisan support for rural development initiatives. But the most significant validation came from the communities themselves. Towns that had struggled with population loss and business closures began attracting new residents and investment. Young adults who had left for opportunities in larger cities started returning, drawn by the resources and sense of possibility that the centers represented. Property values stabilized and then began to rise as neighborhoods surrounding the centers experienced renaissance. Tom found himself traveling more frequently, visiting new center locations and meeting with community leaders who wanted to understand how the transformation had begun. He always insisted that Maya accompany him on these trips, recognizing that she was the future of their movement and that his role was increasingly to support her vision rather than direct it. During one such visit to a center housed in a renovated grain elevator, Tom met Sarah Chen, a documentary filmmaker who was creating a feature-length film about rural poverty and community resilience. Sarah had been following the Wheeler Center story for months, interviewing residents whose lives had been changed by the programs and filming the dramatic before and after transformations of the buildings themselves. "Your family's story has become mythic," Sarah told Tom during a lengthy interview session. "People see you as proof that the American dream is still alive, that hard work and perseverance can still lead to extraordinary success." Tom shifted uncomfortably in his chair, still not entirely comfortable with the attention their story attracted. "I was just trying to take care of my daughter and keep a roof over our heads. The discovery was pure luck." Sarah shook her head. "That's what makes it so powerful. You weren't looking for fame or fortune. You were just trying to survive with dignity. When the opportunity came, you didn't waste it or use it selfishly. You turned it into something that helps other people survive with dignity too." End quote. The documentary, titled Hidden in Plain Sight, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and was subsequently purchased by a major streaming service. The film intercut Tom and Maya's story with profiles of other families who had been helped by the Wheeler Centers, creating a narrative about the ripple effects of generosity and the multiplication of hope through community-wide action. The film's success brought another wave of attention and funding requests, along with some challenges that Tom had not anticipated. Media scrutiny intensified, with investigative reporters attempting to find flaws in their story or evidence of financial impropriety. Political figures began trying to associate themselves with the Wheeler Center movement, sometimes distorting its message for their own purposes. Maya handled these pressures with remarkable grace, developing media strategies that kept the focus on the communities being served rather than on their family's personal story. She established strict guidelines for political endorsements, refusing to allow the centers to become tools for partisan campaigns while maintaining relationships with elected officials who could help expand their Samala programs. The most serious challenge came when a rival nonprofit organization accused the Wheeler Foundation of using its resources inefficiently and questioned whether Tom's discovery story was entirely accurate. The allegations were eventually disproven through independent audits and investigations, but the episode taught Maya valuable lessons about the scrutiny that comes with high-profile charitable work. "People want heroes," she confided to Tom after a particularly difficult week of media coverage. "But they also want to tear heroes down. We have to be perfect in ways that regular people don't." Tom nodded, remembering his own struggles with sudden visibility after his fortune was revealed. "The work is what matters, not what people say about us. As long as we're helping families like we used to be, we're doing the right thing." Maya's college graduation was held at the university's largest auditorium, with Tom occupying a front-row seat that he had reserved months in advance. As valedictorian of her social work program, Maya delivered a commencement address that challenged her fellow graduates to look beyond traditional career paths and consider how their skills could address systemic problems in brained, forgotten communities. "Success isn't measured by the salary you earn or the office you occupy," she told the audience of graduates and their families. "Success is measured by the positive change you create in other people's lives. Some of you will find that opportunity in boardrooms and courtrooms. Others will find it in trailer parks and abandoned buildings. The location doesn't matter. The commitment does." The speech was recorded and went viral on social media, generating millions of views and inspiring thousands of young people to consider careers in social work and community development. Maya received job offers from major nonprofits and government agencies, all offering substantial salaries and prestigious positions that would have launched traditional paths to influence and success. Instead, she chose to return to Clearwater Ridge and assume full leadership of the Wheeler Foundation. Her first major initiative was the establishment of the Wheeler Institute, a training center where community leaders from rural areas could learn the skills needed to establish and operate resource centers in their own towns. The institute was housed in a complex of buildings surrounding the original trailer, creating a campus that told the story of their family's journey through architecture and landscape design. The trailer itself occupied the center of the complex, preserved exactly as it had been on the day of the Great Discovery, complete with the patched roof and the small plaque marking the location of the hidden compartment. Training sessions began each morning with participants gathering in the trailer, listening to Maya tell the story of the storm that had changed everything. The physical space created an intimate connection between the trainees and the origins of the movement, helping them understand that transformation could begin anywhere and involve anyone willing to persevere through difficult circumstances. Tom found his own role evolving as Maya assumed greater leadership responsibilities. He became the Institute's primary instructor for construction and renovation skills, teaching participants how to see potential in damaged buildings and how to manage volunteer labor forces effectively. His classes were among the most popular in the curriculum, partly because of his technical expertise, but mostly because of his ability to inspire hope in people who had experienced significant setbacks. "Building renovation is a metaphor for personal growth," Tom would tell each new class, standing in front of before and after photographs of Wheeler Center transformations. "Both require you to see beyond current conditions to future possibilities. Both demand patience, hard work, and faith that the effort will be worthwhile. And both can produce results that exceed your wildest expectations if you're willing to commit to the process." The Institute's graduates returned to their communities with detailed plans for establishing resource centers, along with ongoing support from the Wheeler Foundation's technical assistance team. Within 3 years, over 200 centers were operating across 15 states, each one serving as a beacon of hope in communities that had been written off by mainstream economic development efforts. The success of the Wheeler Centers attracted academic attention, with researchers from major universities studying the model and attempting to identify the factors that made it so effective. Their findings consistently pointed to the same elements: the symbolic power of building transformation, the emphasis on local ownership and control, the integration of multiple services in a single location, and the personal nature of the stories associated with each growl. Center. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a professor of social work at Columbia University, spent a sabbatical year studying the Wheeler model and concluded that it represented a new paradigm for addressing rural poverty. Traditional approaches focus on either economic development or social services, she wrote in her research report. The Wheeler Centers demonstrate that the most effective interventions address both simultaneously, creating environments where people can address immediate needs while building capacity for long-term success. Maya was invited to guest lecture at Dr. Walsh's classes, sharing her experiences with graduate students who would become the next generation of social work practitioners. Her presentations emphasized the importance of listening to communities rather than imposing external solutions, and of recognizing that people in challenging circumstances possessed wisdom and strength that formal education couldn't provide. "My father taught me that poverty doesn't define a person's worth or potential," Maya would tell these audiences of future social workers. "When we moved into that trailer, people saw failure. But my father saw an opportunity to rebuild our lives with dignity. That perspective made all the difference, both before and after we discovered our fortune." The 10th anniversary of the Wheeler Foundation's establishment was marked by a national conference held in Clearwater Ridge, with participants traveling from across the country to visit the original trailer and learn about the movement's origins. The town's population had tripled since Tom's discovery, with new businesses, housing developments, and cultural facilities transforming the once struggling community into a model of rural renaissance. Maya, now 31, and recognized as one of the nation's leading experts on community development, used the conference to announce the Foundation's next major initiative, an international expansion program that would adapt the Wheeler Center model for use in developing countries. The first pilot projects were planned for rural communities in Guatemala, Kenya, and the Philippines, where abandoned or underutilized buildings could be transformed into resources for education, healthcare, and economic development. Tom, now 55 and showing the first signs of gray in his hair, served as the conference's keynote speaker. Standing on a stage constructed adjacent to the trailer that had once been his home, he reflected on the journey that had brought their family and their community to this moment. 21 years ago, I moved into that trailer because I had nowhere else to go, he told the audience of community leaders, foundation executives, and government officials. I thought it was the end of our story. Instead, it was the beginning of something I never could have imagined. The lesson isn't that everyone who struggles will find a hidden fortune. The lesson is that everyone who struggles deserves dignity, support, and the opportunity to rebuild their lives with hope instead of shame. The audience rose in sustained applause, but Tom's attention was focused on Maya, who was standing at the side of the stage with tears in her eyes. She had grown from the 8-year-old who had called their cramped home cozy into a woman whose vision for social change was inspiring people around the world. The transformation had been as dramatic as any building renovation the Wheeler Centers had accomplished, and infinitely more meaningful. After the conference ended and the visitors returned to their communities, Tom and Maya walked together through Clearwater Ridge, noting the changes that their family's story had made possible. New murals decorated building walls, telling stories of resilience and renewal that resonated with visitors and residents alike. The high school had added a community development program that trained students to continue the work of rural revitalization. The library featured a permanent exhibition about the Wheeler Centers, including artifacts from the original trailer discovery. "Do you think Marcus Wheeler could have imagined all of this?" Maya asked as they passed a new park, where children were playing on equipment purchased with foundation funds. Tom considered the question, thinking about the man who had hidden documents worth hundreds of millions of dollars in the walls of a humble trailer. "I think he understood that generosity creates more generosity." He planted a seed without knowing how large the tree would grow. Maya nodded, then smiled at a thought that occurred to her. Maybe that's the real lesson of our story. Not that we found hidden treasure, but that we learned how to plant seeds that will keep growing long after we're gone. As they reached the trailer, now surrounded by the Institute campus and preserved as a monument to the power of perseverance, Tong realized that his daughter had articulated the deepest truth about their experience. The money had been transformative, but the real wealth they had discovered was the knowledge that one person's refusal to surrender could inspire countless others to keep fighting for better lives. The trailer stood as it always had, humble and unassuming, its aluminum sides reflecting the desert sunset in the same way they had on that first night when Tom had wondered if he could provide adequate shelter for his daughter. Now it reflected something more than shelter. It reflected hope, made visible, proof that the most extraordinary transformations could begin in the most ordinary places, with nothing more than determination and the belief that tomorrow could be better than today. Inside the trailer, preserved behind by protective glass, the original hidden compartment remained visible to visitors who came to understand how their movement had begun. The space that had once held documents worth $210 million now contained something more valuable. The knowledge that every person carries within themselves the potential for discoveries that could change not just their own lives, but the lives of countless others who need to believe that renewal is always possible. Maya had established a tradition of ending each Institute training session in the trailer, with participants placing their hands on the walls that had once hidden Marcus Wheeler's gift and making commitments to carry the spirit of transformation back to their own communities. These moments of quiet reflection connected each new group of community leaders to the chain of hope that stretched from Wheeler's original investment to Tom's desperate night in a storm-damaged trailer to the global network of centers that now served hundreds of thousands of families. "The walls are thin here," Maya would tell each group during these closing ceremonies. "Thin enough that a storm can tear them open and reveal what's been hidden inside. But they're also thin enough that hope can pass through them, traveling from one person to another, from one community to another, from one generation to another. That's the real treasure we discovered in this place. Not the oil rights, but the understanding that hope is never really hidden. It's always there, waiting for someone brave enough to keep looking, even when everything seems lost." And in that small aluminum structure, on 5 acres of desert land, surrounded by buildings that housed programs serving people around the world, the cycle continued. Each day brought new visitors who heard the story of the trailer that had transformed shame into purpose, poverty into abundance, and individual struggle into collective renewal. They left carrying pieces of that story back to their own communities, where new chapters were being written in buildings that others had abandoned, by people that society had forgotten, through acts of generosity that would echo across decades to inspire future generations to never stop believing in the possibility of transformation.